All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another Pattern Observer interview. So, to celebrate our industry-wide survey this month, we've been featuring lots of exciting posts and interviews focusing on the different ways that designers can sell their work and make a living doing what they love. And so, if you haven't already had the opportunity to do so, please fill out our industry survey, and even better would be if you could also pass it along to buyers, agents, or pattern designers that you know. So I'll be sure to post a link below this recording. But today I am absolutely thrilled to have Khristian A Howell with us to chat about print shows and the art licensing world. So you just got back from Surtex.
Yes.
And so you've exhibited there how many times? You've been there several times, correct?
This is my fourth time, I
Oh, wow.
believe. Yeah.
So how did this year compare to seasons past?
Well, for me, this year was actually quite interesting. This was the second year that I really kind of regrouped my brand and really was trying to push not just print and pattern, but really develop a brand that people would start to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
So this was my second year doing that, and I think it was really well received. It was a good show. It was definitely, since this is, my fourth time going, it's definitely a time for me to meet with current clients and solidify those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it was good. It was good.
So when you're going through a rebranding process like that, that's so interesting. Um, did your previous clients, was it easy for them to kind of get on board with that, or did you feel like you received any hesitation, or were they really excited to see you going in that new direction?
I think that everybody was very excited last year when I unveiled, I guess, sounds so dramatic, unveiled the new logo and the new direction. Everybody was really excited because, sometimes when you first start on ventures like this, you kind of are meandering through different directions and trying to figure it all out. And last year, when I started doing some other branches a little bit outside of pattern work, where I wanted to go with the brand, the logo, the business kind of became very clear. So the clients are excited about it. It seems more, for them, it's more of a full package to take to retail.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really mutually beneficial.
So when you're selling really a vision or almost a lifestyle in that way, are trends still important to your work? Are they still important to your clients?
I think trend is always going to be important because at the end of the day, and I always say this, at the end of the day, we're all creating artwork for consumer products.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the client, the customer is seeing at the end of the day, and what we do has to fit into that narrative. Now, I always tell people it's really important to understand trends, to be aware of them, because you want to be able to speak to the market, but then you have to make them your own and transform them in a new and fresh way. So I think trend is always important to the clients that I talk to,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that they really like working with me because I don't just regurgitate the trends. I definitely try to understand them, but also make a strong personal statement as well.
Mm-hmm. You make them your own, which is great. So when you were at Surtex, were there any trends that you felt like were just emerging? And those could be, trends in terms of print and pattern or trends in terms of booth design. Did anything really stand out to you?
Well, I have to admit, unfortunately, I did not get to walk the show
You're probably
as
pretty
much as I
busy.
would want to. It's kind of tough to really get out there and do that when you
Right.
are manning your booth.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I heard from people sitting down, especially like longtime clients that I have deep relationships with, they definitely expressed to me a few things. And one of them was the bird phenomenon won't die. It's not going anywhere for the moment. Lots and lots of birds out there still. Um, and then I think that it's always important to me to make a really strong color statement.
Mm-hmm.
And in my view, black and white is coming on really, really strong. And that was definitely reflected in my booth. And I was hearing it, echoes of that from clients that were sitting down as well. As far as booth design, there was a person that I've now become friends with who really, really stood out to me. I thought her booth was amazing. Her name is Anna Davis. Everybody should look her up. Really, she does it right with her branding, her story. It all's very cohesive.
Mm-hmm.
And her booth was just beautiful. And I don't think the takeaway is necessarily that do what Anna's doing, but
Right.
it's just the fact that her message was so clear
Mm-hmm.
and her booth just really stood out in the row, and it was because her branding, her booth, everything was so clear. It wasn't just a hodgepodge of images thrown at the wall. It was more like you were really stepping into the Anna Davis boutique. And I think for buyers and manufacturers, giving that kind of presentation really helps them see the full picture and see what
Mm-hmm.
it could look like on the consumer and at retail. So that's something I'm going to be taking a page out of her book for sure, something that I'm going to be thinking about in the future.
Do you feel like she had a very clear customer that she was targeting, or the in-use consumer? Was she really inside the mind of that in-use consumer and really did that job for the merchandisers and the buyers?
I do think that. I think it's very, very clear. Her color palette is very consistent. Um, the look is just very cohesive, and it, it, it told a very nice story, which is great. That's like one angle you can go at it, and then
Mm-hmm.
someone like me who a merchant, or excuse me, a manufacturer walks into my booth and asks me if I'm an agent, makes me feel like I'm a little schizophrenic because I have, a wide variety of styles, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to marry that in some way.
Mm-hmm. And
I
maybe,
think I'm pretty successful at it,
right.
but
And
so
perhaps
there's
it's
definitely different takes to it.
right. And that's maybe why, a lot of people come to you is because, and you have a variety of clients in different markets. So like you said, there's really, benefits to both
Yeah,
methods.
absolutely.
So when you're at a show and you're at your booth and maybe a past client or a potential client walks into your booth and they um, pick up a particular pattern or illustration, if they're interested in licensing, this isn't a world that I know a lot about. So if they're interested in licensing something, is Surtex just a place, or print shows in general, are they just a place to kind of get the conversation started? Or do you expect to draw up a contract and sign it at the show?
I think that, first of all, I think the distinction between a print show and a licensing show is really important because
Okay.
for in my experience, like even when I was on the other side of the table at Nordstrom, when we would go buy art, print shows were there. Like people would purchase artwork. You purchase artwork right there. You would take
Mm-hmm.
the artwork home with you. The copyright's yours. It's a done deal. Licensing shows are very, very different. Now, you can certainly sit down and make an agreement right there.
Mm-hmm.
More, I think that happens on the flat fee license side, like a limited use agreement where there's
Mm-hmm.
no royalties involved.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're working on a pure license where you're getting royalties on sales, I have never executed an agreement like that right at the table. There is a lot of back and forth negotiation that happens usually on the
Mm-hmm.
terms. And it's because, you're both entering into a partnership at the end of the day. You're entering into a contract that is not just a one off deal. You're going to be engaged in this contract for at least 12 months, sometimes up to 3 to 5 years. So you want to get the terms just right, and that's not something you can really do on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
When you meet a new client who wants to license with you, a new company, there's a lot of questions that you need answered before you can even present to them the terms you would want to enter into. So that kind of all happens in the months, sometimes years down the road.
So are you typically the first one to draw up a contract, or do they usually draw up the contract and then you review and begin the back and forth process, or does it just vary from client to client?
It really varies very
Mhm.
much. Every company works so differently.
Mhm.
You'll never really sign a contract that is 100% the same as the next. When I first got started, I worked with an attorney for a year on retainer to help me to develop my own licensing contract and just to kind of understand what I was getting into and understand the terms and what to look for and all of these things. So now I do have a contract that I know has been written for me that
Mhm.
is in my best interest. And I always try very hard to work with my licensees um, using that contract because, like I said, I already know it's set up to protect me.
Mhm.
Some companies have their standard contract and they prefer to work from that. But I think the key to note is that no contract is set in stone. Everything is negotiable. Everything. You just have to ask
Mhm.
and understand what the marketplace is like and what how far you can go.
I love that. So that probably is a lot, sounds like a lot of follow-up work and probably what you fill your
Yes.
year up with in between shows. Um,
Yes. It's a lot of chasing.
but so do you have a routine after each show, or maybe it's not that organized?
No, I do actually have a routine, and this is the part that has to be, for me, it has to be super organized
Mhm.
because it's all about the follow up. Like somebody might be very, very interested at the show and they're all into it, and then they go home and they get into their routine and they get into their everyday of meetings and deadlines. And it doesn't mean that they're not interested, it's just that the impetus is really on you to see it through.
Mhm.
So when I come home, well, at a show, I have like contact information forms that I fill out so I understand, who they are, what their business is, all of those kinds of things. And I even take notes on like what the person was like. What are they wearing? Did they have
Mhm.
eyeglasses? Because you see so many people, you want to really remember the conversations that you had. So then I'll staple the business card to it, and when I get home, I'll send them an email thanking them for coming by the booth. Sometimes people request for you to send JPEGs of particular prints they might have called out to them
Mhm.
because nobody makes these decisions in a vacuum with these companies. They have to go home, they have a meeting, they're looking at their whole assortment for the season, so they're trying to see where things might fit in.
Mhm.
So you send lots and lots of JPEGs. And then I let a couple weeks go by and either I'll hear something right away. If not, I'll send them a second follow up. I'll ask them about their timeline. Surtex is at a particular time of the year, and that doesn't mean everybody is in the proper production cycle to take on new art right at that time. So maybe they'll say, you know what, I really like your stuff, but we're going to be working on holiday in September or whatever, for
Mhm.
example. So can you please contact me again then? And then I'll immediately put like a reminder on my calendar so that I remember to get back to them because they really do want to see the art at that time. You have to get to them when they're receptive.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's such an important lesson, is that a lot of these shows don't necessarily fall at the time on the timeline of every company. Not everyone is able to buy prints right then and there. So it's I love that you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
So, following up, we've been talking a lot about Surtex, but I'm really interested to hear about the licensing expo in Vegas that you mentioned. We were emailing back and forth, and you mentioned that you were going to that show as well. So, can you tell me a little bit about that show and how it differs from Surtex and why you choose to show there as well?
Yeah, I this was my first time doing this show, and I've been thinking about it for years and years and years. So I just decided to take the plunge this year. Um, and I have to say, I'm really thrilled with the results. What's great about Vegas is that it's not on the coast, but it's on the West Coast. So
Hmm.
I met people from Mexico. I met people from all over California. Lots of people who might not make the trek out to New York for the show. They just wait for Vegas. And so I
Mhm.
was missing out on all of those contacts. So that was really great. The other thing that was really wonderful about this show is the kinds of companies that were coming to this show. Surtex, although you can see a variety of product categories,
Mhm.
in my opinion, this is not set in stone. This is what I've seen. Um, Surtex is very paper driven
Mhm.
because it runs next to National Stationery Show. But Vegas, I was seeing all kinds of different categories from backpacks to luggage to racing jerseys, which I
Oh,
thought was so
wow.
cool. Shoes, umbrellas, like all of these different kinds of things, that's exciting. Everybody wants to expand their saturation into different categories. So that was the biggest difference so far.
Yeah, that's great. So a lot of our readers and the students on the call are considering attending Surtex for the first time. Surtex is usually the show that comes to mind when people are considering taking their work to a licensing show. So, how did you know you were ready for that big leap, for that next step in your business?
Well, I just really wanted to see what it was all about.
Mhm.
Honestly, I went and walked the show one year and
Mhm.
I saw what everyone was doing and I was like, gosh, I can totally do this.
Mhm.
Um, so I worked really, really hard and got together a ton of work, which I think is, for me, was the biggest deciding factor of whether or not I was ready.
Mhm.
Oh, I should take that back. I walked the show one year. I decided that I was not ready the next year, and then the following year I did it
Okay.
because I didn't feel I had enough work yet, and I didn't feel that my work had developed enough quite yet. So
Mhm.
when I felt strong in my catalog and felt like I had enough work, I just went for it. And I think it's a really personal decision. Like there's
Right.
so many factors that go into it. I mean, it is expensive. You have to be at a point where you can invest in your business and understand that unlike a print show, and this is a really important point, unlike a print show, you're not necessarily going to see an immediate return on your investment
Mhm.
because if you're licensing, you're not just selling prints right there, like, oh, I can sell 10 prints and make my money back. Licensing takes time and persistence. So you might come home from a show and let's say you sign 3 licensing deals within 6 months of that show. There's a strong possibility you're not going to see any royalties until 12 months down the road, 18 months down the road, because you don't accrue those royalties until the product is made, distributed, goes through wholesale, and hits retail.
Mhm.
So you have to keep that in mind. It is a big, big factor.
That is something I really had not thought about. So, had you shown at Print Source or a more traditional print show before showing at Surtex, or was Surtex really the first big show?
Surtex was my first show, um, and that's because I love Print Source, been going to Print Source for years. I still go to Print Source to see what's going on, but I knew from the get-go for me and what I wanted to develop as a brand that selling prints was not the model for me.
Hmm.
I wanted to maintain the copyright, build a name, build a brand, so I knew licensing was going to be the direction for me.
Hmm. And so, sorry, kind of jumping around here, but you mentioned that you felt like, you didn't have enough work at first, but that second year you were really ready to go to Surtex because you had built up enough work. So how many prints, do you remember, how many prints do you felt like were a good amount to have for that first show?
Well, I'm going to be honest. Everybody thinks I'm an overachiever. I don't know if you really need this much, but this is how I felt comfortable.
Hmm.
I think I took about 30 collections the first year, and each collection had like 6 to 8 prints.
Okay.
So it was a good body of work. But I also the way I was thinking about it was that I wanted to have things that were ready for holiday, meaning Christmas and Easter and Valentine's Day. and
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have, my floral prints. I wanted to make sure I was hitting all of these themes,
Mm-hmm.
which are so important in licensing, and also just beautiful collections.
And so that's really, that's also a differentiating factor between traditional print shows like Print Source and then Surtex. Surtex is only once a year. So
Mm,
it's really important, like you said, to hit that holiday, to have those holiday collections, those spring collections. I'm not sure if that market is as divided by seasons um, as the apparel world, as Indigo and shows like that. But that's another really important thing for designers to keep in mind is to hit all those different um, landing dates and once the products hit retail.
mhm.
So let's see here. A few Pattern Observer students submitted questions beforehand, so I'd love to ask a few of these if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So Gretchen asks, she says, does Surtex allow you to share a booth with other designers? Do they have some sort of organized method for matching designers up? And if so, do you recommend this route?
Mm. Well, I've never considered doing that, but and I'm not sure that they're very into it, but it
Mm-hmm.
would be something that you could certainly ask the show.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've seen it done once, but they were very kind of incognito about it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's really something that they're into, but would I recommend it? Well, for me, like I said, it goes back to branding, and you want the focus to be on you if you're going to make the monetary investment and the investment in your time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want anybody to think you're a duo act, or you don't want to create any confusion in any way. So it would not be something that I would necessarily do, but I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it all depends on where you see yourself and the way you
Mm-hmm.
see your brand and where you see yourself going.
And then we had another question here. Have you seen, and we kind of already touched on this, but she asked, have you seen booth decor trends evolve over the past few years or are they fairly standard?
I think it's Surtex. It's pretty standard. I mean, people are just putting up a lot of images on their walls,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's nice when people take the extra step. I mean, since as we've developed more licenses, like we have a great home accessories license now, so we put out nicer chairs that match with the color scheme of the booth. We use nice pillows, try to make people comfortable and sit a while to
Mm-hmm.
talk. Um, and then there's people who definitely go all out. I mean, they'll lay out flooring and rugs and really make a whole scene of it. So I think it's just very important to make a statement that's very authentic to you
Mm-hmm.
and authentic to your artwork and where you see yourself in the marketplace.
Great. And so, for those of you who are on the call with us, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please just type those in now. And Chris already entered in her question. She says, can you share your thoughts on the pros and cons of working with an agent or studio when an artist is a newbie to the field of surface design?
Wow, that's always the $1,000,000 question. Um, okay, let's start with the easy one. I will say this, studios. I think working with a studio is fantastic. I worked with a studio if anybody is familiar with my story, I worked in-house at Nordstrom as a textile artist and product development in kidswear for 4 or 5 years. And clearly, I don't do kidswear anymore. And when I came out of that experience and was ready to go on my own, I really needed to find my voice. And I didn't know what that voice was. So working with a print studio really gave me the opportunity to test the marketplace and see what was going to work and see what people were going to respond to. And I think it's a really, really great entry point if you're, still working things out creatively because there's no risk to you. You don't have to make the investment into shows. They're taking it to shows. And you can see pretty quickly what works and what doesn't just by what moves and what sits for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great experience. Um, agents. Agents can be great. It's not my preferred method. I'm too much of a controls freak. I love running the business and doing the art. But if some artists really just want to focus on artwork,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll say this, if you are the type of person that you don't want to touch the business side or you think that it will be too overwhelming, considering an agent is a really good idea because what I do is 80% business and 20% art.
Right.
It takes so much to nail down these agreements, work directly with the manufacturers, negotiate, work on their timelines. I mean, it's a lot. Market yourself, get the website going, go to a show. So it definitely is a lot to handle. I just happen to enjoy it. So it's a personal choice. An agent can do a lot for you if your lifestyle doesn't permit having the time to manage all of these factors.
Mm-hmm.
Just be very, very cautious when entering into a contract with an agent. Have an attorney look at it. Working with an agent is just like getting married. So I would not enter into it lightly.
Right. All right. Well, I think that was all the questions it seems like everyone has. But thank you so, so, so much for doing this today. I know everyone's really excited to, hear what you have to say about print shows. And I love your message. This is part of what I try and really instill in the students and the readers is that there are very few hard and fast rules in this industry. And it's really more about running a business, like you said, that's authentic to you and your voice and your style and making those decisions that feel comfortable for you. There's no right or wrong way to do things. So I really appreciate that. Before
My
we leave,
pleasure.
before we leave though, did you have any last words of wisdom for designers entering this market or maybe even designers who've been in the marketplace for a while and need that bit of inspiration to keep going?
Oh gosh, such pressure. Um, oh gosh, I don't know. I would say don't chase. I think a lot of people in our industry have a bad habit of chasing a certain look.
Mhm.
Um, you just really have to find your own voice.
I think that's a great way to leave it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a great day. Have a great day,
Okay.
everyone. Bye.